The bells of St. Peter's Basilica had barely begun their first echo when the crowd in the square shifted like water in a basin. Flags rose, cameras clicked, and a low murmur rippled through thousands of people pressing toward the railings. Above them, the balcony loomed, the loggia of blessings, where centuries of popes had stepped into history with a single name. And then came the words that silence even the most restless crowds. Habemus Papam. The cardinal's voice was solemn, steady. Robert Francis Prevost, Pope Leo XIV. There was a pause, the kind that splits time. Then the cheers began. They rolled over the square like thunder bouncing off stone. But behind the carved marble walls of the Vatican, some heard a different sound. Not triumph, not joy. Something colder, a shift. Because Robert Prevost was not supposed to be Pope. He wasn't from Rome. He hadn't trained in Vatican diplomacy. He had spent much of his life in Peru, not in palaces, but in villages. He was a missionary, a listener, a man known more for silence than strategy. And now he stood on the balcony, head slightly bowed, not from ceremonial reverence, but from habit. No theatrical wave, no elaborate blessing, just a single sentence, barely louder than the wind. Let us begin with the people. That was his first act. But even before the words were spoken, one man in the apostolic palace had already seen the future unfold. Cardinal Raymond Burke, draped in scarlet, stood near a window overlooking the square. His face didn't move. His hands didn't clap. His eyes narrowed behind wire-rimmed glasses. To the world, it was a surprise. To Burke, it was a rupture. The papal conclave had stretched into its fourth day. Factions had fractured. Names had circled and collapsed. And then Prevost, a name few considered more than a regional pastor, started gaining quiet momentum. Not as a compromise, as a bridge. And for Burke, bridges were dangerous. They blurred lines. They invited chaos. What frightened him wasn't what Prevost had said. It was what he hadn't. This new pope had a history of walking softly into places others avoided. He had worked with LGBTQ Catholics. He had questioned whether rules were becoming more visible than Christ himself. He had once said, "We must accompany people first, before we correct them." It wasn't heresy. It was worse, in Burke's eyes. It was subtle. Pope Leo XIV didn't appear to challenge doctrine, but neither did he seem eager to defend it. And that ambiguity, gentle, smiling, unthreatening, was, for Burke, a sign of drift. And yet, the crowd below cheered. They didn't cheer policy. They didn't cheer theological nuance. They cheered something else, something older than the rules, the return of a shepherd. Leo XIV didn't promise revolutions. He didn't even mention reform. But every gesture whispered it. He wore the simplest vestments. He refused the ornate throne. During his first private mass, he asked for a wooden chair. "Gold is for kings," he said softly. "The Good Shepherd walks on dust." He walked the halls of the Vatican without bodyguards, shared meals with cleaners and gardeners. When he visited a hospital, he didn't just bless the children. He sat with the elderly, those who had no visitors. He gave no doctrinal speeches in his first month, no encyclicals, no condemnations. Instead, he visited prisons, listened to migrant workers, asked bishops to bring him stories from their flocks, not summaries from theologians. To some, this was holy. To others, dangerously naive. But Burke saw clearly. He had spent his life guarding the boundaries of Catholic teaching. He believed doctrine was not just a guide, it was armor. The Church was not meant to adjust to the times. It was meant to resist them. Burke had challenged Pope Francis before, gently, then publicly. He had authored the Dubia, the formal questions submitted to clarify moral teachings. He had criticized language that softened the Church's stance on marriage, sexuality, sin. And now he saw in Leo not just the continuation of Francis, but the expansion. Where Francis opened doors, Leo seemed ready to walk through them. And that's when Burke began to worry aloud. In a brief, almost private moment, following a closed-door synodal meeting, a journalist asked Burke if he believed Pope Leo would bring clarity to contentious issues. He paused, then answered with a single line. "The Church," he said, "is in danger of losing its soul." The line spread like smoke. He didn't accuse. He didn't name policies. But everyone inside the Vatican knew exactly what he meant. Leo's silence on doctrine had become, in Burke's eyes, a message in itself. A signal that orthodoxy was no longer being guarded. That welcome was replacing definition. Leo said nothing in response. He didn't rebut the comment. He didn't even reference it. But his next homily was telling. He spoke about the parable of the lost sheep. The 99 were not less important, he said, but they were already found. And that was it. No declaration, no rebuke, just parables. Again. This is how Leo works. Slowly, quietly, like water wearing down stone. Observers began to notice patterns. Leo chose not to isolate himself in the papal apartments. He stayed in the guest house. He preferred walking to riding. He delayed certain appointments, not out of rebellion, but out of discernment. He said often, "The Church must learn to breathe again." He invited unheard voices into the Vatican, environmental scientists, abuse survivors, poor farmers. He brought them into consultations, not as guests, but as collaborators. He spoke of mercy not as sentiment, but as a strategy of the heart. "Before we teach, we must touch," he said. It was subtle. It was persistent. It was unmistakable. And Burke watched. He did not call for schism. He did not raise his voice. But his stance hardened. He warned that tone cannot replace truth, that welcome without boundaries becomes confusion, that love, when it loses clarity, becomes something else entirely. To his supporters, Burke is not extreme. He is courageous, a man of principle in a church losing its roots. To his critics, he is rigid, obsessed with form, blind to pain, and yet both men believe they are preserving the same faith. Leo sees a church bleeding in the margins. Burke sees a church slowly crumbling from within. Leo believes the church must descend. Burke believes it must hold fast. And the people, millions of Catholics across continents, are left between them. In Africa, bishops push back against progressive voices in the West. In Germany, synods call for radical changes. In the U.S., parishes split between traditionalists and reformers. The center does not hold because the center has changed. This is the real crisis, not whether Pope Leo is faithful, not whether Cardinal Burke is correct, but whether the Church, as it exists now, can still recognize itself. What happens when mercy and clarity are no longer on the same side? What happens when the shepherd and the watchman walk in opposite directions? Some say this is just another chapter in a long history of Catholic tension. Others say something deeper is at stake. Because this time, The Church isn't simply debating policies, it's debating identity. What does it mean to be Catholic in 2025? Is it doctrine first or relationship first? Is it clarity that saves or compassion that heals? Can truth survive without tenderness? Can mercy survive without rules? Leo believes in tenderness, in mystery, in walking beside sinners, not dragging them back to the gate. Burke believes in orthodoxy, in clarity, in drawing lines so the lost know where to return. Neither man is naive, neither is perfect, but both, in their own way, are protecting something sacred. And maybe, just maybe, the Church needs both. Because Catholicism has never been clean. It has never been unanimous. It has always been stretched, pulled, bruised, and yet still breathing. The early Church wrestled with inclusion. The medieval Church wrestled with power. The modern Church wrestles with relevance. And now, it wrestles with itself. Between Leo's gentle questions and Burke's firm answers lies the future. Not just of doctrine, but of witness, of credibility, of soul. Leo may never write the great encyclical that defines his papacy. He may never issue sweeping changes, but he is shifting the tone. And tone in the Church is never just style. Tone shapes trust, and trust shapes hearts. And Burke, for all his formality, is fighting for those who feel that the heart of the Church is no longer beating in rhythm with its past. So what now? Leo walks the halls of the Vatican with a quiet conviction. Burke watches with a steady vigilance, and between them, the Church listens, waits, worries, and prays. Maybe this isn't a crisis. Maybe it's a calling. Maybe the stretch between them isn't a crack. It's space. Space for the Church to breathe again. Not by silencing one side, but by holding both. A shepherd and a sentinel. A heart that breaks open, and a spine that stands tall. And in that space, the real question rises, not just for Rome, but for every Catholic in every parish and pew around the world. What kind of church do you want to belong to? Let us know in the comments.